A warning: clown images, also demon clown images, and pirate teddy bears. Disclaimer: no children in this story are harmed in any way. A demon pirate's greed Sheriff Rhodes groaned. His head was throbbing. The room slowly stopped spinning as his vision began to clear. He was currently bound to a metal chair with chains. He was sitting on a small stage. An empty party room before him. Whoever had kidnapped him wasn't taking any chances with the local pack alpha. "Welcome back. It would seem our guest is finally awake," said Captain Killigan, stepping out of the shadows. Sheriff Rhodes growled, his werewolf nature briefly overtaking him before he caught himself. Captain Killigan laughed. "Oh my, the local pack's alpha is angry. What fun!" "Where are they?" demanded Sheriff Rhodes. Captain Killigan tilted his head and tapped his index finger against his chin. "Where are whom?" He exaggerated the motion of pondering before shrugging. "I'm afraid you'll have to be more specific, dear Sheriff." "Mrs. Wright and her 5th grade class," said Sheriff Rhodes evenly as he started to pull against his bonds. "And my 2 deputies." "Oh yes, them," Captain Killigan smiled. It was all teeth. "They're here, all of them. Just having fun." Sheriff Rhodes doubted that. His department had received a 911 call earlier from the pirate play zone. A little girl said her class had been kidnapped by Captain Killigan. Sheriff Rhodes and his deputies had rushed to the scene. The pirate play zone was normally closed on Sundays, but Mrs. Wright's 5th grade class had won a special field trip contest. When Sheriff Rhodes and his deputies got here, they had been led into the security room by Captain Killigan himself to review footage of Mrs. Wright and her students arriving when... darkness. Sheriff Rhodes had no memory after that. Worse, he didn't know where his 2 deputies were. Through their pack bond, he knew they were alive, but that was it. "Doubloon for your thoughts?" asked Captain Killigan. Sheriff Rhodes took a deep breath. He needed information and to get free. The only way he was going to do that is through his kidnapper. "Killigan," started Sheriff Rhodes. "Captain Killigan," corrected Killigan, his cheerful demeanor diminishing for a moment. "Captain Killigan," Sheriff Rhodes restated. He had had to deal with his fair number of hostage situations in his career. So Sheriff Rhodes knew to keep a neutral and respectful tone. "What is it you want?" "Souls," said Captain Killigan. Sheriff Rhodes stiffened. "Okay, is that why you took Mrs. Wright and her class?" Captain Killigan smiled once more. "Obviously." "They're children?" said Sheriff Rhodes plainly. "The more innocent the better," said Captain Killigan. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some souls to reap," before heading towards the door. "Captain, you can't do this. You've kidnapped a teacher, children, and officers of the law. Other people will come looking for us," stated Sheriff Rhodes. "More souls for me to play with then," called out Captain Killigan before stepping out of the room. Deputies Hart and Garcia found themselves in a mirrored room. Deputy Hart clutching a purple handkerchief. The last thing each of them remembered was going into the security room with Sheriff Rhodes and Captain Killigan. Then nothing. Well, almost nothing. She remembered snagging the handkerchief from Killigan's shirt pocket. Upon this realization, the 2 of them looked around, but found they were indeed alone. No, Sheriff Rhodes. Their weapons had also been taken from them. The 2 of them picked themselves up and started heading towards the opening, leading out of the center of what appeared to be a maze. They each had a hand reached out in front of themselves. The mirrors reflecting their various images were distorting, and neither of them had a desire to run headfirst into glass. "So what's the plan?" asked Deputy Garcia. "Escape, find the sheriff, and then locate the kids," said Deputy Hart. Deputy Garcia nodded his agreement. It would have taken them longer to escape, but it had occurred to Garcia that there would potentially be a scent trail to follow, so he undressed and shifted to a wolf sniffing the air. An eclectic wave of aromas flooded his sense of smell. Deputy Hart presented the purple handkerchief to Deputy Garcia, and he trotted forward. After she collected his clothes, she followed. They made it out of the maze in good time. Davy Jones' Maze of Wonder, per the sign at the maze's entrance. They now found themselves in the treasure trove play zone of Captain Killigan's pirate ship. Deputy Garcia growled. "Now what?" asked Deputy Hart, turning her attention to Long John Silver's arcade zone across the way. 10 pirate teddy bears, each wearing a pirate patch over one eye and each one of their hands covered in a very real and sharp pirate hook, came marching out. Each of them also swung aimlessly a small cutlass in their other hand. Deputy Hart instinctively went for her gun, remembering she had been disarmed. Deputy Hart swore. Deputy Garcia readied for the onrush. Sheriff Rhodes had been struggling in vain for the past 10 minutes. The chains were unyielding. While he was an alpha werewolf with superior strength, it wasn't true super strength. Plus, he felt a pull on his stamina. It was small but present. Chances are there was silver in the chains or the chair. As the metal alloy wasn't stabbing him or ingested, its effect on him was diminished but still weakening. He muttered a curse word. "You shouldn't swear," said Holly. Sheriff Rhodes jerked his head in the direction of the voice. He strained his eyes and could make out the outline of a young girl around 8 to 10. "Hi," said Sheriff Rhodes. "Are you one of Mrs. Wright's students?" The young girl nodded. "How did you get here?" "I sneaked past the guards. I have a superpower. People don't see me when I don't want them to," said Holly. She paused for a moment before continuing. "Are you who I called to help?" "Yes," said Sheriff Rhodes. "But do you think you could help get me out of these chains first?" Holly shrugged. "I see the lock back here, but I don't have a key." Sheriff Rhodes nodded his head. "That's all right. Do you know where it could be?" Holly smiled at that. Captain Killigan had some keys. Sheriff Rhodes quickly shook his head. "I don't want you getting hurt. You shouldn't go near him." "I know that," Holly said defensively. The only way kids could when talking to grown-ups that say the most obvious things. "How do I help get you out if I can't get his keys?" asked Holly. "I came here with 2 other people. They're dressed like me." Sheriff Rhodes puffed out his chest a little bit and tilting his head to his badge. "Do you think you could find them?" Holly smiled and nodded. In the blink of an eye, the little girl was gone. Sheriff Rhodes sighed. He didn't like the idea of sending Holly out alone, but he had limited options. And clearly the girl had a powerful gift. He hadn't heard or smelled her until she made herself known. He just hoped she'd be able to find Hart or Garcia. Deputy Hart dropped Deputy Garcia's clothes and rushed towards a wall holding a fire extinguisher. Deputy Garcia changed tactics and charged one of the teddies. He successfully snagged the head and ripped it free. Thankfully, just stuffing spilled out as its body fell to the ground, meaning these were actually just animated teddy bears. 1 pirate teddy down, 7 more to go. Deputy Hart yanked the extinguisher off the wall, pulled the pin as she turned, aimed its nozzle, and sprayed at 3 incoming teddy bears sweeping across the area in front of her. 3 cutlass-wielding teddies found themselves quickly covered in foam. Deputy Hart then took the empty canister and began smashing wildly at each of the bears before they could recover. Deputy Garcia had to keep a careful watch on 4 teddy bears that were slowly starting to encircle him. He lunged for one and barely avoided losing an eye as the bear slashed its hook downward. He growled and then charged through a gap between 2 of the bears just before all 4 of them could lunge at him. He rushed over to Deputy Hart, who had just finished smashing her 3rd and final bear. That's when the 2 of them noticed more bears making their way out of Long John Silver's arcade zone. The 2 of them looked at each other, and with an understanding developed from years of friendship and pack bond, rushed out of the fun zone room and found themselves in the main lobby area. Deputy Hart slammed the door behind them while Deputy Garcia snagged a red velvet rope near the main entrance doors. He rushed back towards Deputy Hart, who quickly tied it around the fun zone door handles, just as metal clanging could be heard banging away at the door. The 2 of them breathed a temporary sigh of relief when they jumped out of their skin with a "hello" coming from behind them. They both turned, each on guard, to find a little girl around 10 years old that had literally appeared from nowhere. "Hello," said Deputy Hart. She knelt down, so she was close to equal height with the girl. "Where did you come from?" she asked, her tone calm and cheerful, despite her heart still thundering against her chest. "Your friend sent me to find you," said Holly. "He said he needs a key." She tilted her head and had a pensive look on her face as she observed Deputy Garcia. "You have a weird police dog." Deputy Hart shared a quick look with Deputy Garcia. "Yes, I do," she said. "Our friend, what did he look like?" Deputy Hart was hoping the little girl meant Sheriff Rhodes. "Old and angry. He had a shirt like yours," said Holly. Deputy Garcia snorted. Deputy Hart cleared her throat so as not to laugh and asked, "Can you take us to our friend?" Holly shrugged. "Sure, but he still needs a key. Captain Killigan had some on him." Deputy Hart sighed. Sheriff Rhodes was apparently locked up somehow. In such a way, he couldn't break free, meaning they'd have to get the keys from Captain Killigan, who so helpfully led them into the security room. The security room. Good chance there was a spare set of keys in there. "I have an idea. Follow me." Deputy Hart headed towards the guard station. Deputy Garcia came up next to Holly. She got wide-eyed for a moment, but then tentatively pet the side of his coat. Deputy Garcia rolled his eyes and motioned with his head towards Deputy Hart. Holly took a moment, nodded, and curled her hand in his fur. Deputy Garcia let out a small bark of agreement and began trotting after Deputy Hart, with Holly keeping pace. Captain Killigan's pirate play zone had become very popular in the town of Normal. The captain himself was quite pleased with the success. He usually made a decent amount of money before he ended up disappearing into the night after collecting enough souls. Always changing the fun zone theme to something new from town to town. So no one ever thought to catch on. A circus, a haunted house, the jungle, and so on, and so on. It had been long enough that he could start to recycle through some old ideas like space or cartoons. He claimed it was magic when people asked how he set up so quickly. In a way it was, demonic in nature, but no one needed to know that. Normally he would only take a soul or two weekly, collecting more over time, so as not to raise suspicion or direct attention towards himself. But Hexmore, his master, had been quite clear that he needed an immediate surplus. Thankfully, Captain Killigan had been able to arrange a special field trip contest, and lucky Mrs. Wright's 5th grade class had won. With a small town like Normal, the class sizes weren't too abundant. He had hope for a few more, but he could work with it. Still, it was risky to take so many, as was proved by the local law enforcement knocking on his door earlier this evening. It was strange how quickly they had caught on, but that was small-town life, he guessed. He replaced the purple pocket square in his shirt pocket. The female deputy had lunged at him and grabbed his previous one before he knocked her unconscious like her companions. Using a powerful sleep spell, he had thought to take it back, but didn't care to smell like dog. A small alarm went off on his phone. He brought up his security app. That's when he noticed 2 certain deputies and a child, surprisingly enough, making their way into his security room. "Tisk, tisk," said Captain Killigan. "It would seem we have 3 escapees that will soon find themselves walking the plank to the briny deep." Captain Killigan exhaled as he let his human cartoon pirate disguise shift to a demonic cartoon pirate. Horns protruding from his head, a second set of arms with sharp claws pushed themselves out of his torso, and each of his teeth elongated to sharp points. It would seem his master may lose a soul or 2 tonight after all. "Found something," cried Holly. Deputy Hart made her way over to find Holly dragging out a lockbox. Deputy Hart saw that the box had both a security code but also a scan key. No doubt the key card was on Killigan, too. "Great job," Deputy Hart said in a praising tone towards Holly. "Now we just have to figure out how to open it." Deputy Garcia growled and charged out of the security room. Before Deputy Hart could react, she heard a wounded yelp come from outside. She felt Deputy Garcia's pain through the pack bond. She scowled and let the anger fuel her strength. No one hurt a member of the pack. Deputy Hart lifted the hefty lockbox with ease and made her way to the door. She was going to tell Holly to hide, but the little girl was already gone. Sheriff Rhodes was enraged that someone dared to attack a member of his pack. But he didn't lose himself in anger. He used it. He focused on the pack bond he shared with Deputy Garcia. Deputy Garcia was hurt but alive. No surprise, it took a lot to take down a werewolf. Sheriff Rhodes took in a deep breath, and when he exhaled, he fused some of his power into Deputy Garcia, pushing his healing factor to new levels of rejuvenation and enhancing his werewolf strength with his own alpha might. His current predicament may limit his own strength, but at least he could imbue others, utilizing Deputy Garcia as a weapon of hurt against Captain Killigan. A demon stood before Deputy Hart. "Hello, matey," said Captain Killigan, the words a deep, husky sound. His canine mouth-filled smile sent a shiver down Deputy Hart's spine. Captain Killigan brought down one of his jacked, muscular arms to smash into her. She reflexively brought up the lockbox as a means to deflect the blow. It worked. Partially, the box flew from Deputy Hart's hands from the impact, one that she felt travel through her arms, into her shoulders and down her spine. Had she not deflected the blow, she may have died, despite her healing factor. It's one thing to be able to heal from serious damage, but even werewolves had limits, and a crushed skull was one of them. Deputy Garcia flung himself onto Captain Killigan's back and clamped his maw around Killigan's neck, hoping it would detach as easily as a teddy bear, while Deputy Garcia's teeth savagely bit into Killigan's flesh. The demon's bones, muscle, and sinew prevented Killigan's head from just popping off. The demon screamed and attempted to get a hold of Deputy Garcia with his upper arms, but the werewolf was more resilient than before. Stronger, Killigan could barely find purchase in the coarse fur, but not enough to get the werewolf off his back. Deputy Hart dove to the lockbox. It lay busted open on the floor. While she didn't find any keys, she noticed 3 familiar firearms. She snagged up one of the weapons, making sure it was still loaded, and the safety was off as she turned and took aim at Captain Killigan. Captain Killigan, switching tactics, began to throw his whole weight backwards, slamming Deputy Garcia into the wall. After the 3rd blow, Deputy Garcia released his hold and crumpled to the ground once more. "Freeze," ordered Deputy Hart. Captain Killigan made a show of raising his 4 arms before diving out into the lobby. Deputy Hart didn't open fire as she didn't want to risk hitting Deputy Garcia, who surprisingly was already getting up again. She snagged a couple of ammo clips from the lockbox too, then took a moment to tap directly into the pack bond, sensing beyond just an empathic link. She felt Sheriff Rhodes feeding energy into Deputy Garcia. She allowed herself a bit of relief. Their alpha was a part of this fight too. She made for the door, Deputy Garcia doing the same. As they stepped out into the lobby, Captain Killigan was ripping away the velvet rope before throwing open the doors to the treasure trove play zone. The pirate teddy bears were on parade. "Got it," said Holly, as she finally found the key that opened the lock holding Sheriff Rhodes' chains. She had gone unnoticed the moment she saw the big police dog charge into the lobby. After the pirate monster broke the lockbox that the female deputy was holding, Holly grabbed the keys and rushed out of the room, just before the big dog jumped on the pirate monster's back. Sheriff Rhodes shook off the chains and felt a sense of strength washing over him now that he was free of the Silver's touch. Feeling a sense of renewed vigor, he made to undress so he could shift without ruining his clothes, but remembered Holly. He stopped and turned towards the little girl. "Holly, you did a very good job." "Are you going to save Mrs. Wright and my friends now?" Holly asked. Sheriff Rhodes smiled. "Yes, but I have to stop Captain Killigan first. I don't want him to hurt anyone else while we save everyone." Holly looked like she was going to argue, but then she thought about the monster pirate. "Okay," she said, her voice both defeated and scared. "How can I help stop the monster?" Sheriff Rhodes was reminded of his own daughter in that moment, from when she was a little girl. He knelt down and placed a hand on Holly's shoulder. "You've been very brave, Holly, and I'm very proud of you, but I need you to stay here for a bit, okay?" "But I can help, and you need me to show you where everyone is?" Holly argued. "I do," said Sheriff Rhodes, his voice gentle but firm. "That's why I need you to stay here, where it's safe." The smell of sulfur was overwhelmingly strong as a planar rift opened. A withered old man stepped out and into the room. It closed immediately once he stepped through, the man's skin weathered and wrinkled, no doubt seeing centuries of time. "Where it's safe," mocked the being, his voice deep and clear. It reverberated around the room, powerful and commanding, not at all matching the frail body that it came from. "I wouldn't say that's entirely true, Sheriff Rhodes." "Run," ordered Sheriff Rhodes to Holly before shifting into wolf form, uniform be damned. Like zombies, the pirate teddy bears fell to the ground with a shot to the head. Deputy Hart was making short work of them, but they had numbers. There were at least 30 of them. Deputy Garcia was also efficiently beheading or literally disarming quite a few himself, but still being cautious of the swiping hook hands and swinging cutlasses. But he had managed to eliminate a fair number himself, only taking minor injuries that sealed almost immediately. Despite his enhanced strength and fortitude, Deputy Garcia could feel himself getting tired. He wouldn't be able to keep this up forever, even with Sheriff Rhodes pooling his alpha strength into him. Then, like a light switch, the flood of power was gone. Deputy Garcia collapsed to the ground, exhaustion washing over him. Then he felt an emotional pain so deep that it was almost physical. Sheriff Rhodes had been hurt, bad. Deputy Hart felt it too. The whole pack would. Whatever had just attacked their alpha was powerful. Deputy Hart, seeing Deputy Garcia go down, forced herself to focus. She reloaded a new clip and continued to open fire, finishing off the last of the bears. That's when she noticed Captain Killigan had sulked off during the fight. The muffled cries of children from the back of the building alerted her to where he had run off to. "You know," said Hexmore, "I did warn Killigan not to come to normal." He shrugged his shoulders. "But children will be children. They always think they know better than you." Hexmore summoned forth a fireball and flung it at the werewolf alpha. Sheriff Rhodes had barely regained his footing and dodged out of the way of the incoming Inferno missile. It barely missed him. He had hoped to win against the demonic being with a surprise attack. But Hexmore had simply waved his hand, and a wave of pure magic energy crashed into Sheriff Rhodes, sending him soaring across the room. The weight of such a hit would have killed a mortal being, but Sheriff Rhodes survived, barely. He knew he couldn't take another. He instinctively looked around for Holly to see if she was safe, but realized, with her gift, he wouldn't know. He could only hope. Hexmore had begun to craft another spell. Sheriff Rhodes needed to end this, and quickly. He did something he didn't like to do, but had little choice in such dire circumstances. He opened his connection to the pack and began to draw energy from everyone, minus Deputies Hart and Garcia. He didn't take everything from the pack and not too much. He didn't want to hurt them. But he had to get the upper hand against this fiendish spell slinger, and for that he was going to need speed. A line of lightning shot towards him. Again, Sheriff Rhodes dodged, but with greater ease, as the energy he fed into himself gave him renewed vitality. But he quickly realized it was more than that. He could feel it. The pack was intentionally feeding him more of their energy, but not just him. Also, Deputy Hart and Garcia. Also sending an empathic message to their alpha and 2 fellow pack members: fight, kill, win. Sheriff Rhodes wouldn't make the same mistake again. He kept dodging each flung spell from Hexmore: fire, cold, lightning, acid, each spell just missing him, but damaging the room around him. Sheriff Rhodes was careful to avoid the stage area in case Holly was hiding up there. Each dodge yet another spell which brought him that much closer to his prey. "Enough!" yelled Hexmore, his commanding voice echoing off the walls, causing a visible shake in the room. Sheriff Rhodes was just close enough to lunge, but Hexmore raised his hand and made to crush the alpha where he stood. But just as he was about to clinch his fist, the werewolf vanished. Holly was sitting on the stage, her eyes closed and her face scrunched up hard as she forced herself to focus, focusing everything she had to make the new large police dog unimportant, just like her. But when she did that, it made it so people could see her. It also made her very tired, so she couldn't do it for long. Hexmore noticed her. "Where did you come from, child?" Hexmore demanded. He barely took a step towards her when she vanished from his sight once more and a gigantic werewolf crashed into him. Before Hexmore could react, his neck snapped within the alpha werewolf's jaws as easily as a dog biscuit. Deputy Garcia was fine. He was more than fine. He was amazing. He felt supercharged, more so than before. He didn't doubt he was going to hurt after this and need to sleep for a week after. But as of right now, he knew what it felt to be invincible. Deputy Hart, despite being in human form, was able to keep pace with him. The question of rushing to Sheriff Rhodes' aid was erased at the sound of screaming children. It wasn't long before the two of them found themselves at the back of the pirate play zone. Captain Killigan, appearing even more demonic than before, stood before Mrs. Wright and her students. Mrs. Wright stood in front of the children acting as a human shield. Captain Killigan screamed as he brought his stronger upper arms down upon her, only to be blocked by a barrier of white light. The blow bounced off the magic barrier that Mrs. Wright was wielding against Killigan, but she fell to her knees after his last blow, and the magic shell surrounding her and the class started to flicker out. Two pirate teddies who had been guarding the doorway rushed the two deputies. Deputy Hart shot and eliminated them. Deputy Garcia rushed into the room, but instead of going for Captain Killigan's neck, snapped his maw around Killigan's left Achilles, shaking his whole body vigorously, bringing Captain Killigan down to the ground. Deputy Hart rushed in and aimed her gun at the fallen demon. "Like I said before, freeze!" Captain Killigan snarled, pushed himself partially up, and lunged at Deputy Garcia. Deputy Garcia leapt back and provided Deputy Hart a clear shot. She unleashed 5 shots into Captain Killigan. He stopped moving. She looked up to see the barrier was opaque and she couldn't look inside. Deputy Hart sighed with relief that the children hadn't seen her finish off the demon. Granted, she may have to explain the teddy bears. She gave Killigan a few kicks. No reaction. "It's okay, Mrs. Wright. He can't hurt anyone anymore," called out Deputy Hart. Within short order, the shield dropped, and Mrs. Wright stood before the children, a shield of white light gripped tightly in her hands and braced against her body. Seeing that the demon was indeed dead on the ground, Mrs. Wright allowed her last protection spell to wink out of existence before she collapsed to the ground. Her class immediately huddled around their teacher. "It's all right, children. We're safe now," said Mrs. Wright, clearly trying to hold back tears. Deputy Hart approached the group. "Mrs. Wright is correct. You're all safe now." She smiled gently at their scared faces. "Let's get all of you home." Deputies Miller and Singer were currently on patrol, pulling light double duty, as Deputies Hart and Garcia were still recovering from the ordeal. The pack members not directly involved in the fighting had recovered quickly after a hearty meal and good night's rest. As Alpha, Rhodes had bounced back a bit faster, but he was also not pushing himself too hard either. Wife's orders. Sheriff Rhodes reviewed his report. Mrs. Wright's class was all accounted for. Everyone was getting free therapy that had been involved in the kidnapping. Per the words of First Lady Penelope Blackstone, "I'll pay for it personally, every single one of them." As for Holly, when she realized that Captain Killigan had planned to lock them in the back room, she had used her gift of unimportance to sneak out. She then found a phone and called for help. Then she stayed hidden until Sheriff Rhodes and his deputies had arrived. But Captain Killigan, thanks to his security system, was aware of their presence first and greeted them at the entrance before Holly could get to them and warn them. Still, thanks to that little girl's help, Sheriff Rhodes and his 2 deputies had been successful in dealing with a new threat to normal and saving everyone's life. Holly had been made an honorary deputy and was promised a full scholarship to the college of her choice when she turned 18, to which she had replied, "More school? I thought I was getting a reward." As such, Holly was also promised free ice cream from Frozen Sweets Ice Cream Parlor, as was the rest of her class. Mrs. Wright included. Thankfully, despite the ordeal, she had only requested some time off to mentally recover, but had planned to return to the classroom after a week. When told she could take longer, she said, "My students need me, and summer will be here soon enough." Apparently, Killigan had used a special lock spell to keep the class sealed in the back room. Mrs. Wright, concerned about the limitations of her magic, didn't want to risk draining herself and leaving the children completely defenseless, even if she could have magically broken the lock. Killigan and Hexmore's bodies had been released to the town morgue to be dealt with. After finishing his report, Sheriff Rhodes leaned back in his chair and rested his eyes for a moment. There had been talk from the town council of bringing in extra help to protect the town, as it was clear Normal was having more issues with supernatural criminals. After the last few months of kidnappings and murder, Sheriff Rhodes had readily agreed for the council to do so. Despite having a handful of consultants and honorary deputies that weren't 10-year-old girls, it was clear things around Normal were getting more dire. So, the more help the town could get, the better, as far as Sheriff Rhodes was concerned.